Hi, Nonverbal Comm students. We are talking today about touch. It is chapter 8. This is part 2. I'm going to pick it up on about page 276 with you talking about touch and expectancy violations theory. Y'all have heard me talk about this before. Judy Burgoon came up with this theory, expectancy violations theory. She first studied it in terms of proxemics, how people violate each other's expectations in the space that they use between themselves and others. That's how it was first studied. Well, you can imagine, though, the problematic nature of an expectancy violation when bodies come into contact. And we're talking about touch, the most powerful form of nonverbal communication and also the most misunderstood, the scariest form of nonverbal communication because bodies are coming into contact. And what Judy Burgoon found too is that if you have a touch violation, and it can be something minimal like you get a crappy handshake, a weak handshake or a disrespectful handshake, or you expected something and you got something else. But you can imagine that this goes way up in terms of the range of offenses, even to being criminal, when people touch inappropriately or criminally. Okay? Burgoon's theory says, depending on who does the violation, that changes our reaction to the violation. If, for example, a high status person, a high reward person, as she puts it in the theory, like your boss, if your boss stands too close to you, you realize this is a high status person or a high reward person, meaning this is a person in power who can reward you or not, you're going to judge that person standing too close to you differently. And you're going to go, well, it's uncomfortable and I wish you wouldn't stand so close to me, but, she's my boss, and so I'm not going to say anything. And so you maybe adjust your own behavior or you just take it. If you are a low reward person, then the research says you are more likely to try to correct a nonverbal violation nonverbally first. So in the situation of someone putting their arm around you or something, and let's say that's your boss, that might be pretty inappropriate. And so that's a high reward person, but you may still try to just sort of adjust your body and get out from under the arm around thing. You are very likely to correct an offense non-verbally by shifting your behavior or working somehow non-verbally to convey that something inappropriate's being done or something that you're not comfortable with. Rather than saying, excuse me, would you remove your arm around my shoulder? I find that very uncomfortable. Okay, so we usually use nonverbal means before we use verbal means. But in the touch realm, expectancy violation is very important, and it is something that probably everybody's experienced. Maybe somebody kisses you goodnight on a first date, and that's not your deal. That's you got a rule about that. And you can imagine the range of violations, and we won't go there. But touch is a very tricky subject when we talk about this. On page 277, 3 ways to judge the appropriateness of a touch: location, duration, intensity. 3 ways to judge the appropriateness of a touch. Let's talk about location first. It means 2 different things. The location on your body, where on your body you are touched. Okay? Maybe you don't like anybody touching your head. Maybe as a kid people patted you on the head because you were a little short person, right? A lot of us don't like being patted on the head. We may feel like that's disrespectful as an adult. That may be a weird kind of thing for somebody to do. Maybe somebody grabs your arm a little too tightly and they don't realize they're kind of gripping. There's all these kind of different things. So location on your body is one way. The other thing is the location, meaning the environment or the context within which the touch occurs. So where are you and the person touching you located? 2 ways to talk about location. Duration, how long does the touch last? The touch may last longer than you're comfortable with. Maybe somebody's giving you a handshake and they've just shaken the dickens out of that thing. And they're just holding on to your hand and they're just shaking and shaking and shaking it. And you're like, am I ever going to get out of this handshake? Okay, so probably we've all been there. We've extended touches that have lasted too long. We've had them extended to us that have lasted too long. So duration is another way that we judge the appropriateness, the effectiveness of a touch. And the last one is intensity. I think in the first part of this audio, these recordings that I'm doing about this chapter, I talked about the student I had that shook my hand so intensely that it really made my knees kind of buckle because I have arthritis in my hands, and it hurt. It just hurt. And I told him, I said, honey, you're strong as an ox. You just got to be aware that that's a really intense handshake. And so the intensity of a touch, the grip of a hug, how long a hug might last. Does somebody like bear hug you big time, or is it just one of those little things? And then there's the what we call the terminating pat, where you pat on the back and that says, okay, break from the hug. So these things, I know they're goofy to talk about, aren't they? They even make me feel goofy talking about them on this recording. But anyway, we got to study this stuff. Okay, so applications of haptics research. Again, touch is called, in the research world, it's called haptics. Sometimes it's called zero proxemics. I think that's a little bizarre, but anyway, that's a term. Touch is super, super cultural, right? Everything in nonverbal has to be viewed within a contextual, a cultural frame. That's the word I meant. A cultural context. Oh boy, touch really needs to be done in a cultural context. If you are going to travel or move to and live in another culture, whenever it's safe to do that again, please research as much as you can the appropriateness of touch behaviors, because not all cultures do handshakes. Some Asian cultures do the bow, right? They may say namaste. They do a bowing kind of a thing. They don't have a physical contact as a basic greeting. If you go in for a handshake or you touch someone in another culture in an inappropriate way, that can be a massive error. It can be very uncomfortable and very embarrassing for you. So do study and don't expect people to handle touch like Americans do. And the Americans don't all line up and handle touch the same way. But do research another culture's views on appropriate touch before you immerse yourself into that culture, because you really don't want to screw that up. Offering comfort on page 281. Sometimes words aren't enough, or words aren't comforting, and so we just are there with our presence. But maybe sometimes we need to comfort somebody with a hug, or by holding somebody while they cry, or holding their hand. Again, these are very individual things, and you got to be careful, because when bodies come into contact, it's tricky. And we don't want to make mistakes here and lose relationships. Sometimes we may lose whole relationships because of inappropriate touch. Probably people have had some experience with that. There is some sex difference research. There's research that says women tend to extend more touches to others, and they tend to receive touch more from men and from women. And this is certainly in American culture, but in a lot of cultures around the world. So there is a sex difference. Touch can sometimes be seen as more of a female appropriate behavior. I don't like that. I think this stems from women being the baby birthers. And so, and I forgot to mention that the first of our 5 senses to develop is touch. Why? Because we are gestating completely encased in another person's body. We come to have life, and we are born through touch. So it's the first sense that develops more than eyes or smell or taste. Touch is the first. Makes sense when you think about it. So touch is still very much connected to femininity, to womanhood, mostly because of that connectedness to others that kind of goes back to the biological nature of us being baby birthers and still predominantly the caretakers of babies and children. Also look at the stuff about power, status, and touch. It's quite interesting. Power and status gives you different parameters to be able to touch others. The lower status people have to watch themselves pretty carefully about touch. Now, the higher status people do too, because sexual harassment is a very real thing. But people in higher status positions or in powerful positions are given more affordances when it comes to touch, simply because of the power that they hold. And so you hope that they don't abuse that, but we know that does go on as well. So take a look at that. The last section asks you to sort of use the reflexive cycle, and I want you to consider your touch behavior. I want you to think about your touch ethic. What is it? Where did you learn it? Who are those people in your life who have most impacted your view of touch? How did you learn appropriate touch? And who did you learn that from? And what are your views of that? How are you going to handle having an important relationship with someone who maybe handles touch very differently than you? How will you negotiate that difference between the two of you? That's something to think about. Okay, that's the touch chapter, chapter 8. Have a good one, y'all. Thanks so much. Bye.